What is going on, and welcome back to another episode of iCoach Nutrition Radio. Today, we're going to be diving into the topic of intermittent fasting, but specifically intermittent fasting for women. Okay, and so before we dive specifically into women, let's dive into, as kind of a review here, as to what is intermittent fasting. All right, so intermittent fasting is the practice of going on prolonged periods without eating, right? And there's lots of ways to do this. You can skip a meal, you can alternate days, and there's lots of other approaches there as well. And there's evidence that intermittent fasting, when done properly in the right people, it might help regulate blood glucose, control blood lipids like triglycerides, reduce the risk of coronary disease, manage body weight, and help you gain or maintain lean mass, as well as reduce the risk of cancer and many, many more things. All right, so naturally, a lot of people are trying it, right? But an accompanying trend that's emerged is some women report serious problems, including binge eating, metabolic disruption, lost menstrual periods, and early onset menopause. Okay, so we want to dive into this, right? And dive deep into this and really start to understand what's going on here. So intermittent fasting can disrupt female hormones. And in the grand scheme of health decisions, experimenting with intermittent fasting, probably doesn't seem like a big deal, right? But for some women, it's a bigger deal than you might expect. It turns out that hormones regulating key functions like ovulation, metabolism, and even mood are incredibly sensitive to your energy intake. In fact, changing how much and even when you eat can negatively impact your reproductive hormones. All right. And this can lead to all sorts of different health issues. All right. So let's actually kind of dive into what's actually happening with intermittent fasting in reference to your reproductive hormones. All right. So one way fasting affects reproductive hormones in both women and men has to do with something called the hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis, right? AKA the HPG axis, right? And it's not important to know exactly how the HPG axis works, but in case you are interested, here's what happens. All right, so your hypothalamus releases gonadotropin releasing hormone, or GnRH, in regular spurts called pulses. Okay, GnRH pulses tell your pituitary gland to release luteinizing hormone, or LH, and follicular stimulating hormone, aka FSH. LH and FSH then act on the gonads. Now, in women, LH and FSH stimulate the production of estrogen and progesterone, which we need to release a mature egg for ovulation and to support a pregnancy. In men, they stimulate the production of testosterone and sperm. So because this chain of reactions happens on a very specific regular cycle in women, GnRH pulses must be timed precisely, or everything can get out of whack. Eggs aren't released, periods stop, so on and so forth. All right, and so the big takeaway here is that GnRH pulses seem to be very sensitive to environmental factors and can be thrown off by fasting, right? Even short-term fasting, say 3 days, can alter these hormonal pulses in some women. There's even some evidence that missing a single meal, which of course isn't an emergency by itself, can start to put our hormonal system on alert, right? And so this is why certain women run into problems with intermittent fasting. Okay, so for many years, scientists believed a woman's body fat percentage regulated her reproductive system. And so the idea was that if your fat stores dipped below a certain percentage, somewhere around 11% body fat, hormones would get messed up and your period would stop, right? Leading to, of course, no chance at pregnancy, right? And so from an evolutionary standpoint, this made a lot of sense, right? For our ancestors who didn't have an access to Costco and Amazon, right? A low food supply would be a cause for major concern, right? And so if you're losing body fat, your body might assume that there isn't much to eat and try to prevent reproduction. But the situation is actually more complicated than that. Female bodies seem to go on alert even before body fat drops. And so as a result, women who aren't especially lean can also stop ovulating and lose their periods, right? And so this is why scientists now suspect that overall energy balance, right, how many calories you're eating versus how many calories you're burning, may be important to this process, maybe more important, to this process than what your body fat percentage is. All right. So as we kind of keep moving through this, right, there's a lot here, right? So how your diet and too much stress can work against you. Let's kind of dive into this. So when you consistently consume less energy than you expend, you are known to be in a negative energy balance, right? Or a calorie deficit, right? And so being in a negative energy balance is how you lose weight. So it's exactly how many people are trying to, this is exactly what many people are trying to achieve, right, with dieting, right? But when it's extreme or goes on for too long in the context of other stressors, it may be to blame for the hormonal spiral we see in some women who fast. And so negative energy balance doesn't just result from eating less food, right? It can also result in poor nutrition, too much exercise, too much stress, illness, infection, chronic inflammation, too little rest and recovery, so on and so forth. All right. And so any combination of stressors could be enough to put you into excessive energy balance, excessive negative energy balance, and stop ovulation, right? Okay. So psychological, let's dive into psychological stress, right? So psychological stress can play a role in damaging your hormonal health. Our bodies can't tell the difference between a real threat and something imaginary generated by our thoughts and feelings, such as worrying about how you're going to get abs, right? These threats can increase our levels of stress hormone cortisol. And cortisol, it inhibits our old friend, GnRH, right? And so just a quick reminder, right? Disrupting GnRH creates a cascade effect that can suppress your ovaries, right? And ovary production of estrogen and progesterone, right? And so hormones that aren't critical for reproduction. So you could be hovering at 30% body fat, right? But if you're in a negative energy balance for a long enough time, especially if you're really stressed, reproduction stops, right? And so again, this is the theory, right? Okay, so let's look into kind of as we move forward through this. So why does intermittent fasting affect women's hormones more than men's, right? Well, we're not really sure, right? We're not totally sure. Scientists and researchers aren't totally sure, right? We do know that it's frustrating to hear, right, when your brother or dad or husband, right, partner, whomever here, has been walking around looking ripped after doing intermittent fasting for a few months, right? But there's a few potential contributing reasons here, right? Women may be more sensitive to changes in nutrient balance than men. Men and women seem to respond differently when fasting or significantly restricting calories, right? And this may be due to what's called kisspeptin, which is a protein-like molecule that's essential in the reproductive process. So kisspeptin stimulates GnRH production in both sexes. And we know it's very sensitive to leptin, insulin, and ghrelin, right? These are hormones that regulate and react to feelings of hunger and fullness, okay? So if we look here, right, interesting enough, right? So females have more kisspeptin than males. And so more kisspeptin may mean that women's bodies are more sensitive to changes in energy balance, right? And so compared to men, fasting more readily causes women's kisspeptin production to dip. And when kisspeptin drops, it tosses GnRH off kilter, which upsets the whole monthly hormonal cycle. All right. And restricting certain nutrients like protein may also have different effects on women compared to men. And so in general, women tend to eat less protein than men. And usually women who fast will eat even less protein because they're eating less overall. Right. And so that's a problem because protein provides amino acids, which are critical for the reproduction process. If amino acids get too low, it can negatively affect both your estrogen receptors and a hormone called insulin-like growth factor, or IGF-1. Both are needed to thicken the lining of the uterus during the menstrual cycle. If the uterus lining doesn't thicken, an egg can't implant and pregnancy can't occur. Hence, low protein diets can reduce fertility. So why estrogen matters so much for a woman's appetite, mood, metabolism, and body fat. Let's get into that. So estrogen isn't just for the uterus and reproduction. We have estrogen receptors throughout our bodies, including in our brains, GI tract, and bones. And so if you change estrogen balance and you change metabolic function all over, cognition, mood, digestion, recovery, protein turnover, bone formation, right? And maybe even the most relevant to this discussion, appetite and energy balance, right? And so in the brainstem, estrogens modify the peptides that signal you to feel full. Okay. And there's this thing that's called CCK, right? And this is the hunger hormone, if you will, or this is the fullness hormone, if you will, right? That allows you to feel full. That it's the signal, all right, that tells your brain that you're full, right? Or hungry, right, would be ghrelin, right? So CCK or cholecystokinin, right? That's what makes you feel full, right? And then ghrelin, that's what makes you feel hungry. Okay, and so those are those hormones there. And so in the hypothalamus, estrogens also stimulate neurons that halt production of appetite regulating peptides, right? And so if you do something that causes your estrogen to drop, like fast, and you could find yourself feeling a lot hungrier and eating a lot more than you would under normal circumstances. All right. And so estrogen also affects fat storage. As you can see, estrogens are key metabolic regulators, right? And so yes, estrogens, plural, right? There's estriol, estradiol, and estrone, also known as estrogenic metabolites, are 3 different types of estrogen found in the body. And so the ratios of these estrogens change over time. Before menopause, estradiol is the big player. But after menopause, estradiol drops while estrone stays about the same. Okay. And so the exact roles of each of these estrogens remains unclear, but some theorize that a drop in estradiol may trigger an increase in fat storage. And so this could at least partly explain why some women find it harder to lose fat after menopause. All right. However, that theory may not explain everything. While a drop in estradiol may be linked to an increase in fat storage, it's probably not the sole cause and may not be causal at all. And so instead, fat increases around menopause may be due more generally to aging, lowered muscle mass, and change in appetite, right? And so low estradiol is also linked to higher appetite. So intermittent fasting for weight loss in women, well, it's complicated, right? If you haven't gotten to that point yet, it is very, very, very complicated, right? And this is because women's bodies may just have a greater sensitivity to changes in energy balance. And, right, when our bodies do detect changes, it may disrupt the HPG axis and our whole hormonal cycle is thrown off, right? And so the hormonal turmoil can be aggravated further if there are other stressors draining our energy, right? Think taking care of kids, working more to get that promotion, right? Dealing with a chronic injury. The family, hamster might be lost in the heating ducts, right? Maybe all at the same time, right? Life stressors, right? And so intermittent fasting may decrease estrogen, right? And decrease estrogen may increase appetite and fat storage. So fasting to manage your weight, it may be kind of counterproductive, right? Like getting stuck in one of those Chinese finger traps, right? The more you struggle, the worse it gets, right? All right, so let's look into kind of moving through. All right, so intermittent fasting across the female lifespan, right? And so women, childbearing or not, go through several distinct phases of life, characterized by massive hormonal change. And so these hormonal changes can have a notable physical and psychological effect. And they can influence sleep, they can influence digestion, stress reactivity, and metabolism. And so here are a few of those phases and how intermittent fasting might affect them. Okay, and so intermittent fasting in girls and teens. Let's dive into that first. So during periods of intense growth, such as childhood or adolescence, fasting isn't recommended. Okay, most children are born with the ability to regulate their food intake pretty well, provided they are being given a range of healthy options to choose from. Right, and so teenagehood and even earlier can be a time of intense self-scrutiny and social comparison, and is often when many young girls consider dieting, right? And so it's a sensitive time to change food habits, even when it's appropriate. So instead of restricting food, focus on increasing appetite awareness, right? And mindful eating and prioritizing whole nutritious foods. So as much as possible, promote an enjoyable, stress-free relationship with eating and a kind, caring relationship to the body. Please, 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 please. All right, intermittent fasting and ovulation. So if you're trying to conceive, intermittent fasting could make things difficult. Fasting can inhibit ovulation, okay? If you aren't ovulating, no egg gets released. If no egg gets released, it can't be fertilized. Some women may have been told by doctors or other health professionals to lose weight before becoming pregnant. Many women, when considering pregnancy, start to think about their health more seriously and consider weight loss as a step in the direction. Whatever the reason for considering intermittent fasting, know this: for hormonal harmony for most women, intermittent fasting is not the best weight loss protocol to consider. Most women in the reproductive phase of life do best with moderate, sustainable, good nutrition habits. Okay. And so unless a woman's getting paid to look or perform a certain way, such as a physique competitor or a professional athlete, compromising fertility and hormonal balance may not be worth it. All right. And so intermittent fasting while pregnant, like childhood and adolescence, pregnancy is a time of intense growth. Weight gain is a desired outcome of a developing pregnancy and is a sign of a healthy, growing baby. So even though weight gain during this time is wanted, many women feel uneasy about the upward creeping scale. Women who are especially body conscious or those who wanted to lose weight before pregnancy may still think about weight loss during this time. And so some women may even be advised by a doctor to manage weight during pregnancy, which is a lot to ask when you're already feeling nauseous and tired and nervous about, your whole life about to change, right? And so even if weight management is suggested by a medical professional, fasting is not appropriate during this time. Okay. And so instead of restricting food, again, focus on increasing nutrition, aiming to get adequate protein, healthy fats, quality carbohydrates, colorful vegetables, and fruits, right? And look, I mean, if you have this, topsy-turvy stomach, and it's only letting you eat bread and pickles, that's okay, right? Do your best and take a prenatal multivitamin, okay? All right, so you can also improve health and regulate weight gain by exercising, provided that it's been cleared by your doctor, right? But we want to focus a lot more on living a healthy lifestyle, right? And this is really what we want to be focusing on all the time, but especially there with pregnancy. All right, so from there, intermittent fasting while breastfeeding, right? And so if you've had a baby and decided to breastfeed, you already know this is a demanding time for your body. You might still be recovering from childbirth. You're probably sleep deprived, and your whole life, again, has been flipped around. Plus, that cute little human you made is now treating you like an all-you-can-eat and drink buffet. So during this time, your body needs extra nurturing, extra nutrients, and less stress. Okay, and so for these reasons, intermittent fasting is likely not a good protocol for breastfeeding women. Many moms are concerned about losing the baby weight, right? And may feel pressured and impatient to get their pre-baby body back. Women can still lose weight during this time, but more moderate approaches are safer and will likely yield better long-term results, right? And so for safe, sustainable weight loss, try a combination of moderate exercise, right? Like, going on a walk with a stroller, right? And portion management. Okay. All right. So moving through. So intermittent fasting in aging women, puberty, periods, maybe pregnancy and postpartum. What a roller coaster, right? Then comes menopause, another hormonal transition point in women's lives that can stir us up physically, psychologically, and socially. Okay. And so women in this phase may be returning to themselves after decades of being devoted to children, spouses, and careers, or they may be busier than ever, taking care of aging parents and young adult kids, right? So whatever the context, increasing age often triggers the desire to focus on health. Some women become interested in intermittent fasting because of its association with longevity. Others just want to lose fat in an uncomplicated way. While we don't have quality science on whether or not intermittent fasting is beneficial to women who are menopausal or postmenopausal, we do know that restricting food is also a stressor, right? And so women who worry about limiting food intake to manage body weight tend to have higher levels of cortisol, which again is a stress hormone, than women who don't. And so add that to sleep disruption so common in menopause, and your stress bucket is getting pretty full. Right. And so lower estrogen levels also mean your body has a decreased capacity to deal with stress. And that bucket fills up quicker than it used to. And so even though many stressors are good for us, like exercise, learning, and change, they only make us stronger if we give ourselves the chance to recover from them, right? To make that adaptation. And so if you're a woman in this hormonal phase, try intermittent fasting only if your stress is low, you get quality sleep, you're not tormented by hot flashes and mood swings, and you don't have nutrient deficiencies. right? And even then, start with a gentle approach, okay? All right, so bringing this all together here, wrapping this all up, okay? Is intermittent fasting bad for women? Not necessarily, okay? But certainly fasting is not for everyone. And the truth is, some women shouldn't even bother experimenting with intermittent fasting, okay? And so here's who that population is. If you are pregnant, you should not be doing intermittent fasting. If you have a history of disordered eating, you should not be doing intermittent fasting. If you are chronically stressed, you should not be doing intermittent fasting. If you don't sleep well, you should not be doing intermittent fasting. And if you are new to diet and exercise, right, this is the first time in your life that you've actually started to prioritize diet and exercise, you should not be doing intermittent fasting, okay? Pregnant women have extra energy needs. So if you're starting a family, intermittent fasting isn't a good idea. Right? If you're under chronic stress and you aren't sleeping well, your body needs nurturing, not additional stress. If you're struggling with disordered eating in the past or are currently struggling with it, you probably recognize that a fasting protocol could lead you down a path that might create further problems for you. All right. So are there any benefits to intermittent fasting for women? Based on what we know, intermittent fasting probably affects reproductive health if the body sees it as a significant stressor. And so anything that affects your reproductive health affects your overall health and fitness. Even if you don't plan to have biological kids, right? But intermittent fasting protocols vary. And with some being much more extreme than others, and factors such as age or nutritional status, the length of time you fast, and other stresses in your life, including exercise, are also likely relevant. Okay. And so, you know, there's a lot of different research that's out there. But you know, some of these situations where it could potentially have benefit is, you know, intermittent fasting with women who have PCOS. But again, it's not necessarily concrete. Okay, this is potentially okay. So again, I would say, you know, for most women, intermittent fasting is probably not the best approach. All right, so what is the best intermittent fasting schedule for women? If you still want to try intermittent fasting, there are ways to dip your toes in, right? So consider how much remains unclear. A conservative, excuse me, is probably a conservative approach is probably better, right? Rather than diving into an advanced intermittent fasting approach. And so you might start by keeping a food journal for a few days, get a sense of what you're eating, how much and how often. You know, are you eating late at night and snacking throughout the day? Do your portions tend to be big and fill you up, or do you prefer lighter meals? Are you getting protein on every meal, veggies? You know, once you have some more awareness of your baseline, you can experiment with intermittent fasting, light, right? And here's a couple ways to do that. So begin by stretching the time between eating. If you normally snack between meals, what happens when you don't stop? And what happens when you stop? Sorry. Do you feel ravenous, dizzy, angry? You know, does the hunger ebb and flow? Do you actually feel totally fine? Right? Try lengthening the time between your last meal in the evening and your first meal in the morning. For example, if you usually eat your last meal at 8 p.m. and then eat breakfast at 7 a.m., fasting 11 hours, try eating your last meal at 6 p.m. and eating breakfast a little later at 8 or 10 a.m., right? Fasting 14 to 16 hours. As you try these experiments, though, continue to check in with yourself physically, right? Although you may be a bit more uncomfortable than usual, overall, is the hunger manageable, or do you even notice it, right? You know, when stress spikes, are you more or less reactive? How is your sleep? How is your sex drive? How is your energy levels, your exercise performance? All right, some of these biofeedback metrics there that we can be able to assess. Also checking with your feelings around food in your body, right? Do you feel guilty or ashamed if you have to break the fast early? Do you feel deprived and then overeat when eating is allowed? Do you feel hypocritical of your body shape or attach feelings of worth to how you're intermittent fasting, right? Monitor yourself with curiosity, kindness, and honesty, right? And if you're feeling energetic, mentally sharp, and all systems are regular, continue with a gentle intermittent fasting approach, or try stretching the fasting window a little more. Okay, but here's when you need to stop intermittent fasting. If you're feeling obsessive, unhinged, and consistently lethargic, ease off. Stop intermittent fasting if your menstrual cycle stops or becomes irregular. Stop intermittent fasting if you have problems falling asleep or staying asleep. Stop intermittent fasting if your hair starts falling out more than usual. Stop intermittent fasting if you start to develop dry skin or acne. Stop intermittent fasting if you're noticing you don't recover from workouts as easily. Stop intermittent fasting if your injuries are slow to heal, or you get every bug that's going around, right? You're getting sick all the time. Stop intermittent fasting if your tolerance to stress decreases. Stop intermittent fasting if your mood starts swinging. Stop intermittent fasting if your heart starts going pitter-patter in a weird way. Stop intermittent fasting if your interest in romance fizzles, right? And for women specifically, right? If your lady parts, we'll say, stop appreciating it when it happens. Stop intermittent fasting if your digestion slows down noticeably. And stop intermittent fasting if you always seem to feel cold, okay? Add some snacks and or shrink your nightly fasting time to 12 hours or less. Don't get caught up in doing it right? As we've seen from coaching, over the years, right? There are many ways to transform your body, and none of those methods require you to be perfect, right? In fact, perfection is the enemy. Consistency is the name of the game. And again, fasting is not for everybody. So if you want to experiment with it and you feel like you're in a good place to be able to do so, awesome, do it. But just if you are a female listening to this podcast, you've got to remind yourself that intermittent fasting definitely affects women differently than men. And you've got to be aware of that. And so, education is everything, understanding the why, and ultimately listening to your body, because you know your body better than anyone else. So I hope this was useful. I hope this was helpful. I hope this added value. If you have any questions at all over intermittent fasting as a female or a male, please don't hesitate to reach out. Let me know. And until next time, thanks, guys. See ya. Bye.